Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Anna Fotyga, member of SEDE, and on the request of Madame Nathalie Loiseau, I take the chairing of subcommittee during the first point of the agenda. Don't worry, it's just replacement. Welcome to the SEDE meeting on 25th of May. Good to see all of you. I would like to remind you that our meeting is web streamed and interpretation is provided in the following languages. It's French, English, German, Italian, Spanish and Polish. I would like to adopt. Yeah. I would like to ask for adoption of the agenda of the meeting. In absence of any remarks, I deem the agenda adopted. Thank you. Actually, there are no chair announcements or major chair announcements. I think that after taking over by Madame Loiseau, we may listen to some of remarks. I wouldn't like to use too much of our time due to traffic. I think members had some difficulty in coming to this meeting on time, but certainly we have already our guests to start the first point of the agenda, and it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome Deputy MOD of Czech Republic, person well known to all those who are engaged in security matters, former important advisor to the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, Mr. Jan Havránek. Actually, it's a real pleasure to welcome you, sir. We had opportunity to meet quite frequently previously, and in spring of previous year, Mr. Havránek took his return to Prague, taking his important office, and as far as I know, within the remit of Czech MOD, there is and directly allocated to Mr. Havránek, there is also strategy, security strategy of Czechia. Today's topic is briefing and exchange of views on the event we were already discussing, debating in the European, we've been debating in European Parliament recently. The case happened in 2014, but actually it was fully exposed, assessed and exposed by Czech services and announced by Prime Minister quite recently. Yet, I mean the explosion in the ammunition facility in Vrbětice, also in the course of events, two Czech citizens perished, now we know that the explosion was perpetrated by two active servicemen of the Russian GRU military secret service. And well, without much ado, I think I would like to give the floor to Mr. Jan Havránek. Here later on we'll have some time to discuss the event within the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Madame Fotyga, and good morning to all. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be joining the subcommittee's meeting again. I have to say, it's not that long time ago that we were sitting here together discussing NATO-EU cooperation, and that's also one of the topics that I want to touch upon today. And also good morning to the members of the committee who are joining us online this morning. As Madame Fotyga mentioned, I really welcome this opportunity to discuss the current security affairs and current developments with you. It's really a real honor and pleasure, and I want to thank all of the members of the European Parliament who have expressed their support to my country in light of the announced incident, and who have been firm supporters of closer NATO-EU cooperation and focusing on defense affairs in general. It is also quite important for us officials from the ministries to be engaging directly here with the politicians, as you have a very important role in terms of approving some of the key funding for closer defense cooperation among European states. Once again, happy to be here. Madam Chair mentioned the Vrbětice incident, which of course happened in 2014, but was revealed by my authorities approximately 1 month ago. I cannot comment too much on some of the details. Feel free to ask me, of course, in the Q&A session. If I can answer, I'll answer happily. But I want to say that despite this event happening, having happened some 6 years ago, it still needs to be seen as a part of a continuum, and it is obviously being linked to the Salisbury poisoning and other incidents that the GRU has perpetrated across Europe over the past couple of years, and it really needs to be understood as a part of Russia's long-term tactic vis-à-vis Europe, vis-à-vis NATO, vis-à-vis the European Union, trying to undermine our cohesion, solidarity, trying to undermine the trust in our institutions, and really displaying some sort of arrogance, I would say, towards the West. I also would like to underline that it's been quite shocking to us when we learned about it last month. It was shocking to both general public, but also to many officials working on these issues. And as I said, the case has not been closed yet. It's still being investigated, and we will see what the next steps and what the additional details will be. Obviously, the announcement resulted in a diplomatic row between Russia and my country. As a result, there has been some reductions of the respective embassy staff, but more importantly, Russia has put my country alongside with the United States on a list of unfriendly countries. This, again, speaking of continuum and continuity, needs to be seen in the context of a similar practique when it comes to some of the European officials and some of the European politicians. The announcement was timely in the sense that the very same week my government approved a national strategy to counter hybrid interference. It was a pure coincidence. The strategy has been in the making for some time, for a couple of years, in fact, as a result of a thorough national security audit that pointed out the shift in both security and defense policy and security and defense challenges, the blurring between the two, and underlined the need to coordinate on in a much closer way on issues of national security. The strategy adopts a whole of society approach. It's been inspired by similar approaches by other European countries as well. It talks about the need to build a resilient society, to adopt a systematic approach to countering hybrid interference that can be perpetrated by both state and non-state actors. And it also calls for a closer international cooperation, both with the European Union and NATO. And this is quite timely for us, as countering hybrid has been one of the key issues on EU's agenda. It has also been one of the flagship projects and activities of the NATO-EU cooperation, and it's still relevant as we see. It's still relevant also in the context of the incident that happened in Minsk, and it gives us a real opportunity to, for us here in Europe, here in Brussels, to adopt a new approach to countering hybrid interference, not only because of the security situation and the overall international politics and developments, but also by the fact that there are two strategic reviews happening on both sides of this town. First, the strategic compass that should be adopted by the EU next year in March 2022, hopefully, and strategic compass that we hope will be tasked by the upcoming NATO summit, and these two strategic documents provide a new opportunity to issue a new mandate for the international community, for the transatlantic community, to address the counter-hybrid interference. For now, there has been parallel handbooks or guidebooks to handle hybrid, to coordinate in a much closer way. But I think we should move away from that and move forward to something I call the joint or common counter-hybrid toolbox, for instance, as both organizations have unique capacities at their disposal, and individual nations can offer those activities and capacities for the use and for the employment by these organizations. So, Madam Chair, if you, for the sake of time, I would perhaps stop here. Thank you once again for this opportunity to be having this discussion in a hybrid format, both in a physical presence and online. And I look forward to the questions by the members. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. And well, I think that after this session we'll return to the point of adoption of minutes. I wouldn't like to Minister to wait too long, so please excuse my omission. Colleagues, I start the list of speakers. I think that Mr. Tom van den Candelare, who is a replacement to the EPP coordinator Arnaud Danjean, is in remote mode. Am I right? Yep.
Yes.
Please activate.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Minister for Defense, for your interesting introduction. I think the moment of this exchange could not be better, unfortunately. We have been witnessing indeed worrying developments regarding Russia's aggressive policy since years now, and the Ryanair flight hijacking is the latest example of what I think I can easily say, the deterioration with Russia and its allies. Our heads of state and government rightly condemned last night the illegal and provocative activities against the EU and its member states. During the debate in plenary on 28th of April, I did stress the importance of a strong unity and more assertive stance towards Moscow from the EU member states. And I also explicitly supported the call to show solidarity with the Czech Republic by expelling Russian diplomats, not only at the national level, but also at the European level. I think this would convincingly show the unity we need to demonstrate in this situation. Mr. Deputy Minister, our committee will discuss later this morning the relations and cooperation between the EU and NATO. And I want to seize the advantage of your presence today in our committee. I indeed would be glad to hear your view on how to cope with Russia, specifically in the context of EU-NATO cooperation. How would you look at the latest developments in relation between the EU and Russia from the EU-NATO cooperation point of view? And especially, I would like to hear your opinion on these developments in the light of two important policy changes that we're dealing with right now. On the one hand, our own EU strategic compass in the field of security and defense, and on the other hand, indeed, the upcoming review of the NATO strategic concept. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Sven Mixer, on behalf of the S&D.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I would also like to thank Mr. Deputy Minister for providing us this briefing, this information, and like the previous speaker, I believe it's a very timely exchange. Indeed, Russian interference in our affairs and the operations of Russian secret services outside Russia's national boundaries is becoming more and more brazen, if you will. And the speaker compared the explosion at the Czech ammunition depot to the Salisbury poisonings, and indeed the parallel, I think, is very relevant. But I would like to focus my question on the response of the European Union and of the international community. Obviously, after the Salisbury incident, also it was not, unfortunately, possible to achieve a total consensus of the Union, but the overwhelming majority of the member states actually demonstrated solidarity with the UK government and joined in expelling Russian diplomats. And I believe that this strong unity is actually a very good way to deter adversaries like Russia, because obviously when there's symmetry between between expelling diplomats from two states, then Russia does not feel the same pressure as it does if a number of countries expel the diplomats. Now we saw a lower level of solidarity, if you wish, with the Czech Republic. Obviously, there was some time difference or time distance from the actual event till it was exposed, but I would like to hear your analysis as to whether it is at all possible to deter Russia using pressure like this, and if so, what lessons learned we need to take from this incident, and what we need to do better by way of sharing information, sharing intelligence, but also by way of engaging diplomatically among ourselves in order to actually achieve consensus on the need to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Petras Austrevicius of the Renew Europe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, welcome back to our committee. It's always good to see you and have an exchange on various issues. Well, no doubt. I mean, we have expressed, and for very good reason, solidarity with Czechia. It's a very European way. It's a partnership way. It's a friends-like, support. No doubts. I only regret that the European Union itself didn't expel any Chizhov, so to say, colleagues from Brussels. It's very regrettable, and it's not at all a sign of proportional solidarity we have to extend all over the European Union and even NATO countries. Indeed, the accidents years ago in Czechia were well planned and had a very clear message. It was a kind of revenge against those who've been supporting Ukraine or in one or another way associated with the, let's say, supply of so needed things for Ukraine defense. And I mean, this outburst of Russian reaction to very right decision and timely decision of Czechia was followed by a huge wave of propaganda and disinformation from Moscow. Would you be a bit more specific, explaining means and channels Kremlin used to come with the huge pressure, informational pressure from its side, and what did you learn in this regard from a recent case in general? My second point is on cybersecurity. Did you witness any cybersecurity pressures or attacks following this kind of so-called diplomatic disagreement with Moscow? Did they use again any bypassing channels or did they employ anything new? You didn't see it before, because as we know, I mean, Moscow never leaves things aside. I mean, they come with a very direct reaction whatsoever. And finally, I know that Czechia is quite involved in supporting Ukraine, strengthening Ukraine's defense for very good reason as well. Would you tell something more on your plans, how Czechia foresees further actions in this regard? And would you support the CSDP mission of the European Union in the eastern part of Ukraine, seeing that now we can employ even a European peace facility, which is available, and we have to get ready probably for using this facility on the right time? Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. And as far as I know, there is no representative of or coordinator of ID willing to speak. Am I right? Yeah. Okay. Then Mrs. Marketa Gregorova of Greens.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good day to you, Mr. Havránek. I have to thank you for the work done in regard to the national strategy, especially in cooperation with the Center Against Terrorism and Hybrid Threats. And I would like to hear your thoughts in this regard to one problem, the interdepartmental cooperation. Because at the Ministry of Defense, there are, to my knowledge, approximately 2 people assigned for hybrid threats. But when, for example, the COVID pandemic hit us, there has been no one in the Ministry of Health, and it was very palpable. And it was difficult for the CTHT to coordinate anything against the coronavirus disinformation, which spread as wildfire. So are there any plans for a better and structural cooperation among ministries and departments? Is something already put in place, or is it accounted for in the national strategy? And how do you perceive the lack of any campaign or reaction on the disinformation regarding coronavirus from the side of the Czech Republic? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I know that Mr. Waszczykowski is not available in a remote connection, so I would like to give the floor to Sasha Vondra, Mr. Alexander Vondra, on behalf of the ECR.
Yeah, thank you very much. It took a bit longer time to to open the connection, but I am now there. First of all, I would like to thank to Jan Havránek for his adequate presentation. I think that if the Czech government would communicate like he is communicating with us, we would be in a much better shape. And also thanks for all your effort in designing this counter hybrid threat strategy, because I think it shows us the way forward to everybody that this is a serious challenge which requires, I would say, both defensive and offensive measures to be taken on the EU and EU member state side. Just in reflecting the overall European response to Verbětice case, I think that NATO was strong in its response. European Parliament, thanks, was very strong too. And some member states, among those who are now talking during our subcommittee sessions, like the Baltic states, Romania, Poland, they express their solidarity with the Czechs also in a very practical terms. But on the other hand, some other major states like France or Germany did nothing, in fact, to show the solidarity in practical terms, like recalling the diplomats. So my question is, how this is being translated in Prague, those differences among the responses on the level of the EU member states, and whether you would draw some kind of a lesson out of this and would expect to do a little bit more next time, in particular in the light of the recent development with regards to Belarus, because I think it shows pretty clearly that if there is not an adequate response, then the temptation to continue with those kind of hybrid operation can even grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I give the floor to Nick Wallace of the left. Oh, sorry. Who is
in the 2014 explosion? There's a level of certainty here that is not supported by the facts. The Czech President Miloš Zeman confirmed that there is no concrete proof of Russian involvement in this particular incident. That he has faced a serious amount of condemnation for simply pointing out that there are other possibilities is a bit worrying. This is not a sign of a healthy environment for debate. When conclusions are being rushed to without supporting evidence, it is usually a sign that the issue at hand is more important to some camps as a useful weapon rather than there being any desire to get to the truth and bring justice for the victims. What we know about this story raises more questions than answers, in particular surrounding the role of IMEX Group, the private company that had the contract to operate the ammunition depots. There was odd activity involving staff and the owner of the company in Verbětice in the days just before the first explosion. There were also reports that there should have been more evidence of the presence of weapons and munitions at the explosion site, and IMEX have reportedly filed a criminal complaint on the suspicion that the depot was robbed before it exploded. Are these irregularities still being investigated by the Czech authorities? And what has the outcome been of all this unfounded certainty about this old story coming out at this particular moment in time? It has meant the derailment of an imminent deal for the Sputnik vaccine and the exclusion of Rosatom from the nuclear tender and the expulsions of diplomats on both sides. Anyone who has a vested interest in scuppering EU-Russia relations further would certainly be celebrating. And Mr. Havránek, I mean, given that this is 7 years ago, has the fact that this come up at this time, has it anything to do with the upcoming elections? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. It is the first. It has been the first round of representatives of political groups. Now I give the floor to Mr. Havránek for his first response to questions, and then possibly we have also opportunity to ask further questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for all these questions. I've taken a good note of these, and I'll try to answer them in a coordinated way, and in perhaps grouping some of those questions. First, on NATO-EU cooperation, indeed, there are currently 2 reviews that will have to address one way or another the challenge of Russia. And I think both strategic compass and strategic concept of NATO should also address the question of what NATO and EU can do together vis-à-vis Russia. And we have both political tools available. We have tools of deterrence available when it comes to NATO, for instance. And I think the overall answer to your question is we need to show that we're strong and firm and that we're coordinated and that we're solidary with one another. So the tools are there. I mean, we have a full palette of full spectrum of tools, but we need to make sure that we have a political dialogue between the 2 organizations that discusses Russia, where we talk about Russia and the kind of challenges it presents. So far, I haven't seen that dialogue happening. So far, the NATO-EU cooperation has been more about what kind of activities we can do together to improve cooperation in defense, less so on the political side, I have to say. So, that's also my hope and expectations from these two reviews coming up. There was a question about the disinformation and the kind of trends we've seen in the incident or in the aftermath of the announcement of the incident. And it was quite actually interesting to see how the disinformation websites that are operating, quote unquote, in the Czech Republic and that are well mapped as being funded through various sources from Russia, how they switched almost overnight from the anti-COVID propaganda or spreading false news about COVID in general to pro-Russia and pro-Kremlin narratives. And that was well documented. It's also available in the public, and it is just fascinating to see how these tools operate. And I also have to say, while preserving all the legal instruments and abiding to law, there are also ways to address the structure of the funding of these websites, for instance, and asking questions whether they apply and abide to law. In other words, these can be, their operations can be scrutinized relatively easily, and I would like to encourage all of you in your countries to look at the question of the sources of pro-Kremlin propaganda and work with your fellow politicians and try to address this issue. As for the cyber attacks, I don't have any information that I can share with you at this point. To my knowledge, and in the public, there has not been any incident that we could link directly to the announcement. But of course, political attribution or attribution of cyber attack is also a political decision. Wrong with the mic. We need to be mindful of the fact that attribution can also come at a later stage. our cooperation with Ukraine, I mean, we are in regular touch with the authorities of Ukraine. We support at the Ministry of Defense a long-term cooperation, transformation of their armed forces, including providing capacities on the territory of the Czech Republic, helping the Ukrainian armed forces to increase their defense capacities. But could there be a CSDP mission in Ukraine also funded through European Peace Facility? I mean, I could imagine so. If you ask me privately, I'd say why not? And I think that the European Peace Facility, which, by the way, will be of subject matter of interest to you as well, should not only be dedicated to crisis management operations, but it should really support capacity building operations outside, well, in our close neighborhood, in all geographic directions of strategic interest. So this is something we will be discussing at various levels in other institutions here. So why not? And thank you for raising that. Madam Gregorova asked about the interministerial cooperation specifically in the Czech Republic and whether there are any plans for cooperation between the departments and the ministries. The short answer is yes, there are, but also for the sake of this being an international forum, let me just take a step back and just provide a more general answer. The nature of the hybrid threats is, and the challenge of the hybrid threats is that it aims at all sorts of institutions at various levels of public administrations. And the challenge indeed is intra-departmental cooperation and coordination. Now, when it comes to the Czech Republic, we have set up a working group, a task force linked to the National Security Council. And I have to be very frank and open, we're just learning how to coordinate on issues related to hybrid. Of course, there are public institutions, state institutions that have their traditional competencies, but the challenge is indeed to both stay within the remit of these competencies and be able to share relevant and timely information among one another. And here we're again looking at sources of inspiration in other European countries. And I would just say, you know, ask me in a couple of months' time how well we are doing. But it is challenging. It is challenging. Then there were a couple of questions about how we feel about the response when it comes to diplomatic expulsions. I have to say I understand your questions. I understand these concerns and how it may appear, but we're looking at the couple of facts. There has been a strong support by NATO. There has been a strong support by the European Union. There has been some diplomatic expulsions, and I have to say that the case is still ongoing. It's not a closed case. So I know that other colleagues in the government are actively working with other allied and EU ministries on this. And of course, I mean, the time plays a difference. If I can use this forum and speculate, I mean, had this happened a couple of years ago, or had this been announced a couple of years ago, or had this happened just in the prime time today, we might be discussing a much more difficult and much more serious situation, both at NATO and the European Union. I don't want to name specific articles of the treaties or clauses, but I think we need to have that conversation about what would happen if such an incident were to happen today, and how we would respond. Also, you know, for me as a representative of the Ministry of Defense, I'm a a strong believer in NATO and EU solidarity, and I would not want to be the messenger of spreading disappointments or sowing doubts in that solidarity among one another. I understand your jobs as politicians is to call out those who are in the government to do more, and I appreciate your calls for that. But at the same time, there are other ways to show solidarity other than through diplomatic expulsions. And finally, questions by Mr. Wallace. I mean, I have to say that you have a very detailed knowledge of the case and the overall situation in the Czech Republic. And as I said at the beginning, many of these things are still subject of investigation. The Prime Minister of the Czech Republic and the government clearly stated that there is just one version that is being investigated, but I cannot comment on the file. I think that has been it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you once more, Minister. Now I open the second round of questions, starting with Mrs. Radka Maxova, S&D.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, dear Mr. Havránek, thank you for your invitation. It's a very important topic of my country. As you heard, the dangers of allowing the Kremlin to conduct its hybrid warfare operation became clear once again, as the details of the Vrbětice ammunition depot explosion from 2014 in the Czech Republic transpired. Generally speaking, Russia hybrid warfare has intensified during the past few years in both military and non-military terms, from the annexion of crime through the poisoning of Skripal and increasing interference of Russia in the Western democratic processes, through disinformation, cyber attacks, economic pressure, and deployment of irregular armed groups. I am therefore glad that during the past few years, the notion of Russia hybrid warfare has transformed in the understanding of national security in the Czech Republic, as this will allow us to react adequately to the current situation. I very much welcome that the new Czech national strategy for countering hybrid warfare aims at reducing our strategic dependence on countries with different values, especially when it comes to oil, natural gas or nuclear fuel. I am also happy to see that modern technologies, including 5G, are mentioned in the document, as the leading player in this technology is China, and the security threat should also not be underestimated. Finally, I would like to point out the importance of continuing the strengthening of resilience of not only the state, but society, so that the weaknesses cannot be exploited by the perpetrators of hybrid interference. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madam. Now I have Claire Daly of the Left.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to the Minister for coming in. Yeah, I too was here to hear about the malign role of Russia in the 2014 explosion, and I know you've answered my colleagues, you can't give any details to that, but I'm sorry, I actually don't think that's really good enough at this stage. On the one hand, you're saying you can't tell us any information. Then on the other hand, you're saying, oh, well, the investigation hasn't been concluded. And yet we've very developed opinions coming out from this Parliament, including the call from the Russia delegation that Russia should compensate the families involved, without any evidence at all being produced to show Russian involvement. Now, I want to know what happened in that explosion. 2 people lost their lives. Your government has been investigating it for 7 years, or the Czech authorities have. Has there been a report produced onto that? Has it been published? Can we see it? What action are your law enforcement authorities taking to deal with this? What action is your court courts taking to hold those responsible accountable? And do you actually know? Because as my colleague said, your Prime Minister and your President don't really seem to know. So I'm wondering, could you answer the questions that were asked about, is this not really all about the election in the Czech Republic? Or is it about what you seem to emphasise on, a bit of background to beef up the need for NATO-EU involvement? Thanks.
Thank you very much. In absence of other questions, I would like to ask my own questions, if possible, in my role as ordinary MEP as well. Minister, certainly there were a series of events that we may link to hybrid activity by Russian Federation. Certainly the case incident in Salisbury, attempts to kill two persons on UK territory, at that time not only NATO member but also the EU member. We had targeted killings of a variety of persons, being Georgian, others on the territories of NATO countries. We had the case of Eudebates, but also, as far as I know, not fully revealed or exposed but similar cases happening in Bulgaria around 2014 as well. We have to remember that 2014 was totally different time, starting of the aggression of Russian Federation in Ukraine, illegal annexation of Crimea, illegitimate annexation of Crimea, and also aggression in eastern part of Ukraine. It requires certain activity of Czechia to come to conclusions that are not fully exposed yet, but it is the nature of hybrid warfare as well, that it is extremely difficult, complicated to assess all details, and therefore we have to stay united in countering hybrid threats. Some colleagues told us about possibility of diplomatic response, but how do you see now the usual double-track approach that is so much promoted in both organizations, in NATO and rightly so, in NATO and the EU? But we have to find a proper balance between deterrence, making it really effective, also in terms of hybrid attacks, and eventual engagement in dialogue. How do you see this, let's say, Harmel formula to the approach to Russian Federation on this? Because actually, when we speak on diplomatic tools, there were many announcements by people close to Kremlin now that Russia wants to be even more assertive and showing disregard to, let's say, opinions of the West, or political, so-called political West. May I ask these questions? And now, floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me start with the last question, if I may, and then answer Madam Daly's question as well. Whether harmful is still valid, the formula of dialogue and deterrence. I think it is. We have to, we shouldn't close the channels of communication, I think, as a bottom line. But we should use those channels to communicate clearly, to communicate directly, and to tell the unpleasant facts as well, and to show our solidarity and to show our firmness. But of course, it takes the two parties to communicate. And if Russia is putting some of the countries on a list of unfriendly countries, and if it's naming politicians and public figures in the public as unfriendly to Russia, that makes the dialogue much more difficult, if not impossible. But as you said, it's a double-track approach, dual policy, if you will, and we should maintain it also because I don't see anything new emerging right now. But that is not to be excluded, of course, in the future, that we may have a shift in that policy. But currently, we should keep it because it has the strong deterrence component in it. Now, when it comes to the other question from the member of the left, is this linked to the parliamentary election? Well, first of all, I'm not a politician, so you should ask the question to the politicians. Second, my government has not been staunchly anti-Russian so far, and I would find it hard to believe that they would suddenly switch that stance without having strong enough facts. And as I said, it's been under investigation. The case has not been closed. It's still being investigated. And our police authorities have clearly said that they have been looking for the two men who have possibly perpetrated that explosion, Mr. Mishkin and Mr. Boshirov, and I have a high trust in our public authorities in general. So again, this is pretty much all I can say about that current case, and you should be directing these questions directly to my government.
So I'm sorry, Madam. We do not maintain this kind of discussion, direct discussion. Unfortunately, I have to close this debate. In 1 minute, Mrs. Loiseau is going to take the floor as well. I have maybe one thanking Mr. Havránek for his very detailed response to questions of MEPs and for his presence, physical presence today in the European Parliament. I would like to stress necessity to effectively deter actions of Russian Federation, in particular on territories of the EU and NATO member states. We have a recent case of the unlawful seizure of the airplane, Polish airplane, and diverting it to Minsk, forcing to land. Yesterday's and today's meeting of European Council is also dedicated to this case. So we have many cases of hybrid activity, either by Russian Federation or instigated by Russian Federation. And this balance between effective deterrence and engaging in dialogue in order to avoid incidents, because it is the main reason is also relevant. I have one obligation from the opening of the Subcommittee on Security and Defense. I would like to announce that in absence of remarks concerning adoption of minutes of the previous meeting on March 15th and 16th, we deem minutes adopted. I understand. Further remarks I leave to Mrs. Nathalie Loisel. Thank you very much. Short break just for disinfection of the podium. Thank you.